Hello, everyone. Welcome to CE2, Charlottesville Entrepreneurs and Espresso. My name is Hope McCutcheon, and I'm very excited to be a co-host of this awesome monthly event that has been going strong since at least 2015. So we're in 7 years. We're embarking on 7 years, which is awesome. And for those of you guys who have not attended before, this event, every month, the third Tuesday of each month, we have two speakers featured. We have an early stage entrepreneur, which they share about their business, and they actually have an ask for the audience. So what I love about this event, it's a little different than other scenarios where you might just come and listen to speakers. You can actually have the opportunity to engage here, which we really encourage. And so the entrepreneur has an ask, and we can all help them solve their barrier to growth and give them ideas and connections and that kind of thing. And then after that, we have a more seasoned entrepreneur, call it the crash and learn speaker, and they share about their entrepreneurial journey. It's typically a 15, 20-year plus entrepreneur founder. And it does not matter your background or your industry. I always take something away from it, which it's fascinating and awesome. And you get to hear stories that you wouldn't necessarily hear in the highlighted articles online and things like that. So, and then after that, we do announcements. I'll talk about that later. And then this used to be a live event until the pandemic. And so obviously there was networking time on the front end and back end. And so in efforts to simulate that, we have breakout rooms after where each speaker will be in a room and you can go chat with them in a little bit more of a small environment at will. So looking forward to that. And then we end pretty sharply at 10. So, we will have people continue to trickle in, but definitely excited to go ahead and get started. Real quick, I'm going to talk about the other organizations real quick that help run this event. So I am on the board of CBIC, Charlottesville Business Innovation Council, along with some of my other fellow board members and people that make that organization really happen. Tracy Green and Craig are on here, Craig Honig, chairman. And we also have Community Investment Collaborative, the CIC, and the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center. And we are sponsored by the Batten Institute at UVA. So a lot of just really phenomenal organizations that really make things happen in the entrepreneur community. So let's go ahead and jump in. I am really excited to introduce our first speaker. This is Matthew O'Connell, a little bit about his background and his company, Alignr. Just a little bit of a background. He's from Philly. Grew up there, and every now and then you meet one of those entrepreneurs that have always been entrepreneurs. They sold candy bars in middle school and stuff like that. So that was Matt, except for he found golf balls from bad golfers and resold it back to them. So that's how he made money young. So kind of always an entrepreneur. He's married to an entrepreneur now as well, which is pretty cool. He enlisted in the Navy out of high school and served in the intelligence community, did a lot of international ops, which was pretty awesome and exciting. And in 2014, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but he and his wife relocated from Hawaii to Charlottesville. So he he started his own startup, which he says failed very fast and very miserably. But that did not deter him as a true entrepreneur. And so then he worked for Joel Selzer at Archimedic for several years. And Joel has actually been one of our Crash and Learn speakers before. So awesome shout out to him. And then in the late 2021, so in the pandemic, he actually started Alignr. Just really saw an opportunity. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but saw an opportunity to help some business owners. And I did ask him for a fun fact, and he has been on 3, maybe even 4 flights where the aircraft caught fire, has had emergency landings, and then asked me if I'd like to go on a trip sometime. And then disclosed much, much later that these were military oriented aircrafts, because I was certainly concerned initially when he told me that. But would love to give the floor to Matt. If you want to go ahead and unmute, we look forward to hearing about Alignr.
All right. Thanks, Hope. And thanks for you putting this on and giving me the opportunity to speak. So I'll share my screen real quick. I've just got a few slides, and then I'm excited to jump in and ask for some advice. So Alignr is a tool and it's a framework that we're building to make it easier for teams to build great products that solve real problems. And what we're looking to do is help companies reimagine how they plan, collaborate on, and validate work before they commit to it. And what this is going to help do is help companies streamline their planning so they can build more valuable features for their customers faster. So, what's the problem? If you're familiar with product and the product landscape, these probably look really familiar to you. So, the current tools that teams use to manage large-scale products, these are your roadmaps and your backlogs. So the problem that we've identified with these is they're lists of tasks. It's just a bunch of lists of things to do. And what we want to do is actually connect that list of tasks of things that you're doing to the value that you want to create with your company. And on top of that, how do you layer in customer feedback? How do you layer in discovery into that process to help inform you and your company get to where you need to go? That's what we do. So, when I talk about tooling and what companies use, these tend to be some of the very popular tools that product companies use. And the way that we differentiate the space is you have a bunch of tools that help you ideate, come up with solutions, and work with strategy. And then you have a bunch of tools that help you execute on that strategy. These are your Jira's, Monday.com, Trello, et cetera. So where we fit in this piece is we are like the hub in which you take all of that strategy that you've developed and refined and prioritize it, and then export that to your execution system when you're ready. That way your team is able to focus on the pieces that matter most to you. So that's the high level value proposition of Alignr. And what it looks like is something like this. So you work from problems all the way through, how you measure those, like success towards solving those problems, through the opportunity space. This is collecting your user feedback, figuring out, doing your discovery work, figuring out what are the right solutions that are going to drive real value, and then eventually end up in your solutions. And then what that results in is it results in a roadmap that's more focused around the value that you're trying to create. This is a lot more manageable than the other ones that I showed you in the Gantt charts that exist today. And this is a better, communication tool when it comes to figuring out, hey, what should we do next? And why are we doing these? Why are we doing these things? So high level, that's Alignr, and that's where we're at. And I'll go ahead and start talking a little bit about our business. So we're in beta right now, and we're working with a bunch of companies that are trialing it and providing some amazing feedback to help us drive the future direction of the product. We have a couple companies that are committed and paying for it, so we've got some early traction, and we are now at it. We're fully, it's fully bootstrapped. Right now we're in this phase of well, how do we scale? So scaling is the next piece, and that's kind of my first question when it comes to B2B. This is B2B SaaS low touch product is where we want to be. Right now we're kind of medium to high touch, I would say, and that's partially we kind of want to be there so that we can learn a lot about what our customers actually need, but we want to figure out how do we lower that bar and how do we start to go out and market. I'm not a marketing expert. That's my big ask here is what are some strategies and techniques that other founders have found useful in a B2B low touch play that have been effective for marketing. I don't know, is there anything, Hope, that I've missed on the teeing that up, or is that?
Yeah, you can turn off the screen share too if you want, just to
oh yeah, perfect,
full screen. No, I guess we can start with that question. What you can repeat it again, and what tools have, go ahead.
Yeah, so what tools and techniques have other companies used to help market their products or their tools or their companies? it would be really useful if it was also in like the context of like B2B marketing. That's kind of something that we're trying to hone in on and focus on. So if anyone has some really good feedback there, I'd love to hear it, or any feedback.
And then you had a follow-up question to that as well, didn't you, around your own marketing?
Oh, like around marketing, like just in
Yeah.
general, like how to do it or what teams find useful. Yeah.
So he's trying to figure out how to basically market this product now. They're in beta and getting ready to really be on the marketplace, but he's finding a little barrier in marketing it and getting in touch with the right people in the organization and getting it in front of them and showing the value. So just general marketing.
Hey, Matt, I'll jump in if anybody else.
Go for it, Ross.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And I really like the business. I think that you're working in a space that's really important for innovation. That product road mapping, I've been a part of those Gantt charts as well. And anywhere from putting them in proposals to putting them in progress reports, I agree, it's quite tedious. So I think you're definitely onto something. I'd be curious to know, before we dive into any B2B, who are your initial customers that you're currently working with, and who do you think this is going to bring the most value to? And then I think what is really important to do is kind of lean into that group. And then I think we can all help with some strategies from there. So can you give us a rundown on that?
Yeah, sure. So, like our ideal customer profile is we're targeting growing. Like we originally started by thinking like, all right, growing SaaS companies, like that's it. Like those are the ones that are struggling with this because they're growing, their requests are coming in faster than they can handle it, their roadmaps are getting and backlogs are getting unwieldy. So we were thinking like somewhere, and they also have to have multiple teams. So like if you're just got like one team, like most of them feel like, okay, we got this. So it's a little bit harder of a sell, although I still think it's valuable for like single entrepreneurs, but it doesn't resonate the same way it does with teams. So our focus is on like startups that have multiple teams or multiple, simultaneous projects going on. And those are the ones that it's resonating with right now. So, so I would say like 20, like 10 to 20 person companies on the low end. And then when they get much larger, they're much more interested in solving for this kind of problem. So the company, the few that are committed and paying, I think the smallest one that we have is about, I'd say about 10, 15 people. And then the other one is actually I think they're a Fortune 500 company. So they're on the bigger side. It's a smaller company within a Fortune 500 company. So did that answer it, or is there any?
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And it helps me understand, where your brain's going. So are these mostly software companies that you've gotten to work with so far? Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really good point. We're approaching this from like, we're very specifically targeting software companies right now. I think that it is very applicable to lots of different businesses. And, the way that you think about executing on your strategy is obviously, it's really important. But that is also another like really focus piece. Like we really want to go after software companies because we think that this problem is exacerbated in that space.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can tell you from, I worked for an engineering company and this was a major bottleneck for them as well. Just, to put that out there. But I think that, yeah, your main focus could be those small business, that early stage software company. And one of the strategies I would do you use any specific social media regularly?
Yeah, so I used to be like anti-social media. Now I'm not. But LinkedIn is one that I've always used, and that one seems to be okay. And then Twitter is where a lot of my ideal customers, like they tend to live there. So I'm trying to build that up. But yeah.
That's exactly what I would say. I'd say you can go into LinkedIn and Twitter and you get into some of these, software threads of people, and you can start working within that world. And, you know, I see people posting all the time saying like, hey, send me your company. I'd love to check it out. I'd love to pay for your service, just because they want to support early stage people. It's harder to actually find that and execute it than, sometimes it's just words, of course, but that's what I would say to start with, especially in a B2B sense, because you can identify those groups of people. LinkedIn is great. For my company, in a lot of ways, I just use LinkedIn. I used to do the LinkedIn and the email follow-up, but now I just realized that people are more likely to respond to a LinkedIn message in the markets that I'm pursuing. And I would imagine it's probably similar for you. So that's something I would definitely lean into. I agree, social media, it has its downsides for sure, but it's a really good avenue to reach so many people so quickly. Do you guys have any salespeople, or are you working on this solo? What's your?
No, yeah. So I'm the only full-time, employee on this right now. So no salespeople. I was thinking that's another, I guess, question. Is it more important in like a low touch B2B to go like market, like find somebody who's really good at marketing or really good at sales first? Like what is there, or do I have to find both?
If you're planning to hire somebody full time, I think, yeah, we'll probably all have a lot more questions in terms of answering that question. But the one thing I'd say, just from a founder perspective, you can kind of blend it. And that's what's nice about social media. And you mentioned Twitter. If you can get into Twitter and start having conversations with the right people, those conversations will grow into other conversations. So from a founder perspective and a bootstrapping perspective, I think you can do a lot in the next 2 months by just saying, hey, I'm going to talk to people every Thursday for a 4-hour block. And you just start trying to line up, calls every single week for that 4-hour block. You'll make a crazy amount of progress and learn a lot about your markets as well. So before you spend any money, I would definitely do that. And then that might gain some clarity into where you're going. So I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm gonna take a pause for a minute, but I appreciate you guys hearing me out and answering those questions.
Thank you.
So this is Desi Armstrong. I actually work for a software company. And one of the things that I would say is, think about where the people who are in those strategic positions within the software companies might congregate. So we are starting to, just as an example, we're starting to look at moving more agile. We do it, I would say loosely, but so for example, I've joined a couple of agile groups, both on LinkedIn and on meetup.com and different areas like that. So that might be one area that you could try to link up, because a lot of times you'll have strategic stakeholders trying to understand that process. So that's one place I'd look.
I like that. Yeah. So you're saying like where are those groups that you normally find them? Are they on, I'm on a couple that are like Slack groups, but where else are you finding them?
So the ones I joined specifically, I was looking local. So there's one in Richmond, there's one in Charlottesville. But I would imagine both on Twitter and even LinkedIn, you'll have groups like where people are going to get information about, the agile methodology. And so you could look in that area, and with you being a party of one, joining a lot of different local groups might be a hard thing to do. But I was thinking within Twitter and LinkedIn, you might be able to find some groups where there's a decent amount of activity, where there are people in numbers, so that you can start having those conversations.
And Matt, you might want to go to meetup.com. That's probably where she may have found some of the groups she's part of.
You're exactly right, Tracy. That's where I found both of them, actually. So meetup.com was a great place for that. And I was able to find quite a few, especially during the pandemic, where they were virtual. So you may still be able to do that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a plus side of the pandemic is being able to reduce that windshield time. Hope, I have a question and Max has a question. So Max, why don't you go right ahead?
Well, I have another thing to piggyback off of Matt's original question. So if yours is related to what you just said, then you can go ahead and
No,
finish
go
it.
right ahead,
Okay,
please.
cool. Well, I can share a little bit. We've actually been recently kind of on the consumer side of a decision like that, kind of buying a B2B software product. So I can share a little bit of some of the things that influenced my decision process.
Yeah.
We were looking for like a new software tool that helps us with Google ad management and digital marketing and things like that, that a digital marketing agency would use. And the companies that caught my eye, I mean, they kind of had some marketing presence along every step of the funnel. So from basic interest or basic awareness, excuse me, to like what kind of companies are out there, to interest, and then to decision, like all along that line, they had different content that kind of showed me the use of their types of products. And they followed me around, like on LinkedIn, I saw the ads popping up on Facebook and Instagram, and those are the ones that really caught my attention. It's like, okay, I see what you're doing there. So that somehow they had a pixel on their site that put me in their retargeting audience, and then they hit me on all social media networks with their ads. And they had useful blogs about, you know, what exactly it looks like using their product on a day-to-day basis, how it solves problems. And some of the ads were very targeted to exactly somebody in my role. Like, hey, are you tired of, what was it? Are you tired of pulling in digital marketing data from different places and trying to put them all in one report? Like that was kind of the ad front. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm dealing with. So if you have some very specific ad proposition, like, hey, are you tired of overly complicated Gantt charts? Something like that, that's really going to hit someone in that role and be memorable.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. The blog content is something that we've been doing too, like putting that together and trying to get that out there. We're trying to do it in like a I don't know if this is right or wrong, but trying to do it in like a non-salesy way. So like, it's not like you're reading through it, like, and it's just like, oh, you're just trying to pitch me on something, but it's actually like trying to produce value.
Yeah, there's a fine line there with blogs of like, yeah, producing value, but also letting them know like, hey, we're here to help you with this too. Yeah, it's a fine line.
Hey, Tracy, do you have your hand up still?
I do. I was gonna ask a few questions. Can you talk at all about your pricing model? For one, it's sort of, I have multiple questions. So let me just sort of tell you where I'm going with this. So your pricing model to me is important, and who you think has the buying power. So like, for example, Max may have the problem, but does he have the control of the budget? Does he have the authority to spend the money? So who has the authority to spend the money? And then even before then, what customer discovery work, if any, have you done?
Yeah, so customer discovery on the problem side, quite a bit, because that's one of the things that our product actually does, is helps you capture. It's all based on how you integrate discovery into your problem solving process. So we use our own product to actually drive all of our decision making. So that we're starting to feel like we're getting really clear on the problem solution fit. To answer the purchaser question, I would say it's like VP of product, head of product, tends to be the one that really pushes for, advocates, or has the budget. COO in one case was the right person. Typically the people like asking for it with the problems are the PMs that have to put these reports together. So basically they're the ones that are the bridge right now between like, what is the problem that we have, or what are the solutions that our team is working on, and like, what is the problem that we have? And they're that like manual bridge between between like the business problem and the actual things that you're doing. So like, they're the ones that feel the pain, but like the VP of product, the ones that are like consuming the reports and everything, they're the ones that typically have the budget. For pricing, so pricing model, still thinking through this a bit. I think we're going to go metered seat. So there are different roles in the application. So you can have like viewers. It's very important that everyone has access to view everything. Otherwise, you kind of lose value. So we didn't want to meter seats off of access off of like viewer seats, but like who's actually getting value out of using Alignr? Those are the product people. So we were going to meter, so pay per seat for editors or like contributors. That's where we're leaning in that direction right now.
Okay.
Did you have any more questions, Tracy?
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, Jason and Hannah, I know both have their hands up. I don't know who was first, but Jason, you want to go?
Hey, Matt, good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. How are you doing?
Doing well. So one of the things that keeps coming up or I keep thinking about is as a small software company trying to blaze a new path. If I were you, I would stay much more focused, like figure out some niche market where you can have double-digit success. And I think about locally here, Co-Construct, and how they went out and they just solved the needs of, say, developers and builders. Now, obviously, that's a huge market, but I would think even smaller than that. And if you could find, say, nonprofit organizations where, like I think about over at the iLab, all the startups that we have and trying to get them aligned between what their aspirations are and what the tasks are to actually be successful and accomplish something, like going really deep in that area allows you to build out the features and functions that are going to resonate with that audience. Because I can tell you, Moreau and Jira and Teams and all these, they are going after the whole market. They're going to boil the ocean, and they're not going to leave these little pockets. They're not going to even pick up the phone for audiences that would be enough to make a very substantial cash flowing business for you. They're not even going to care about that because they're aligned much different than you are. And then that also goes to what I think Max and others were saying, where at that point, then you're very targeted in LinkedIn and elsewhere looking for those pockets of conversation. And so as many have heard me say, I'm a big proponent of effectuation and bird in hand. Think about areas where you might have particular expertise, and maybe it is around aircraft or something like that, and you could just go very deep into that vertical because you already know that industry. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. But let me know if you want to reach out and we can chat about it. Certainly happy to put it toward startups as well, though I don't know that that's quite the right space for you, but I think it would apply there.
Of course, thank you. I like the pockets of influence and like finding those too. That's good. Thank you.
We have time for just one more. So Hannah, if you would like to go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Matt.
Hey.
I was just curious to hear a little bit more about your current approach. I know that's kind of been discussed, but like, how do you advertise your services to businesses? Like, what do you say to draw them in right now?
Right. Yeah. So I've reached out and have commitment, like I've demoed, I want to say to 46 companies right now. So that's how many I've reached out to. I've got about 20 that I've pulled in that are actually like trying this thing out, and about 4 that have committed. So out of all of those, like how I got them, mostly through LinkedIn and like connections that I like and warm intros. That's most of them. I haven't spent any like money trying to like push the advertisement because I really want to get the messaging right first and make sure that I have like good I really identify like the ideal customer profile or the purchaser profile, which I think we're figure out.
Yeah. Well, my thought is much less in depth than everyone else's, I feel like, but I was just thinking about how I know that you said you're trying to find that balance between, not wanting it to seem like an advertisement, but wanting to connect with people. And I feel like if you came up with 1 or 2, like if you had some statistics that you could just list and say, this will make your company this much more productive. I feel like evidence-based management is such a buzzword right now, even though it's been around for a while. And if you could just kind of put a couple short facts out there that somebody could read and say, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that. Like that could really help my business. I don't know. I feel like with the sort of offering that you have that could stick out to the clients that are looking for? And maybe that's something that you've already thought about. I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in.
No, that's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for all of your great thoughts for Matt. And if you would like to, Matt, put your contact information in the chat. And then Matt will also be in a breakout room afterwards. If you have more thoughts for him, definitely jot them down and go meet him over there and convey them. I know he'll appreciate it. And any connections you have, I'm sure he'll appreciate as well. So
Thank you. Thank you.
yes, definitely. All right. Well, let's change gears and introduce our Crash and Learn speaker. I'm very excited to introduce Joe Rinkevich. We have been talking for quite some time just to find the right timing to have him come in and share and a little bit about his background, which is very fascinating. College-wise, he went to UNC Chapel Hill, got his BSc in business administration. And then what brought him to Charlottesville was his master's at UVA. He got it in urban and environmental planning. He actually, even through all of that or after that, has spent over 30 years in working in sustainability and started his career, I guess, after 2 years after college in the financial industry. He actually moved to Japan for several years and started in sustainability there. Since then, he's consulted for a number of large corporations, from Walmart and eBay to Honda and the Navy and just the Army, and has helped. He actually has started a number of companies. I believe, Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if any of my facts are wrong, but I think he founded his first company in 2004 in biofuels, and then started Scivera in 2008. I am pulling this pretty much straight from their website because I thought that it was a really great summary of what Scivera does, but he had seen that retailers, brands, and their suppliers needed better knowledge about the chemicals and their products and processes. And so what Scivera does is they provide that chemical knowledge so that product development teams and sourcing professionals can drive better and safer products and more sustainable society. So it's a huge mission behind what he's doing. And really his company is a leader in that movement. And very exciting is that in 2021, his company was actually acquired. And, stories like that coming out of Charlottesville are always very exciting. And he has stayed on board with the company as COO in sustainable chemistry. And he's a family man too. He has 2 teenagers. So I know he's very busy, a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old. And just really excited to hear about your entrepreneurial journey, Joe. So I will go ahead and give you the floor.
Thanks, Hope. It's great to be here. It's great to see a few familiar faces and lots of new ones, and looking forward to continuing the discussion today. Matt, super interesting overview of your business and your product, and looking forward to talking about that going forward. Hope, apologies first. I completely dropped the ball on the fun fact to send to you, but I thought of one.
Okay.
So my fun fact, I guess, would be in 1992, on my way back from Japan, I met up with a buddy in Hong Kong, and we traveled from Hong Kong to Paris by land took us about 5 months, but we successfully somehow made it by bus and train and cab and everything else, that full distance, including the Trans-Siberian Express back in the day when the Soviet Union was kind of changing and no longer in existence. So it created some very interesting dynamics between China and Russia and all of the former Soviet states that we were traveling through. So super interesting. But with respect to my story and Scivera, I come at this, I think, probably differently than most typical entrepreneurs, in that I started, maybe not, I'm interested in everyone's feedback on this, but I really started as a subject matter expert on a topic that was emerging back in the late 90s. And that, of course, as we all know these days, is sustainability, and how businesses think about that topic, think about their products and their product development process and their relationships with suppliers and customers, and how over the years they've, to a greater or lesser extent, factored the sustainability questions and challenges into the work that they do. And very early in my career, right after graduate school, I joined a startup at the time here in Charlottesville, a consulting business that was helping companies think about sustainability in their business. And it was founded by a guy that's still here in Charlottesville named William McDonough, an architect, and his partner at the time, a chemist based in Germany. They started to think about products and materials and supply chains and how sustainability principles can be embodied in stuff as it's being designed, developed, and manufactured. And a key part of that, of course, is what are the materials made of and how do they impact human and environmental health during the sourcing, manufacturing, use, and end of life or recovery and reuse and recycling part of the life cycle. If you look around you in the room you're in, every single thing, all of those materials are made up of chemicals, whether they are naturally sourced materials and chemicals or synthetic ones that are manufactured by some of the world's largest companies, or even some small entrepreneurial businesses are making amazing materials these days. And one of the things that's always been a head scratcher for so many people at any stage of the consumer product supply chain is really understanding the underlying story of the chemicals and the materials that are in the things that they're using for their products. Traditionally, the question has always been a compliance question, regulations when it comes to chemistry. So as long as a particular chemical or material that you're using isn't bumping up against regulations, traditionally, it's been okay to use it. And it's sort of been a green light to use anything as long as it's not banned or otherwise restricted in your market or in the place that you're manufacturing things. But what many of the world's largest brands came to realize over the last 20, 25 years is that simply complying with regulations is not sufficient to tell the story that they want to tell, to resonate with either the big customer that they have, a government or a large retailer, or the individual consumer out in the world, or the business that's using their product. They've increasingly been asked to answer deeper questions about the materials and the chemicals in their products and processes, to tell a richer story beyond, hey, we're not breaking the law. And so they immediately ran into roadblocks in trying to answer those questions. And the first 10 years of Scivera and the work that I did in the consulting firm prior to that, and as Hope mentioned, I had a little chapter in the middle there where I worked in a biofuels startup. Those questions were always coming up in the consulting work I did, in the work that I did as Scivera was spinning up. Companies were always asking, what I really need is ... What I really need is to better understand the stuff that's coming at me to be able to make a more informed decision about it, not just whether it's compliant or non-compliant with regulations. Also need to know that too, of course, but getting into those richer questions is what the unmet need always was. And the challenge to getting at that information was, traditionally, it was extremely complicated to understand at a deeper level the chemicals and materials used in products. It took a PhD toxicologist to really ask questions about individual ingredients. It took significant data management to understand what's actually in a material that goes into a running shoe or a home office table or a pair of blue jeans. Most of the companies that are making decisions about chemicals out in the world really don't have the visibility of the actual chemicals that are in the things they're sourcing. Now, from a regulatory context, of course, you have certain visibility. You have to disclose things that are restricted or potentially could cause harm to workers or the environment, and you have to manage those things. But that's a regulatory regime. If you're a Nike or an Apple and you want to understand more deeply the characteristics to make more informed decisions, that regulatory approach doesn't help. So what we decided to do at Scivera was build a platform that got at that deeper information, but dramatically reduced the cost of accessing it and dramatically simplified the way you can interpret that information as a business process. So traditionally, if you asked a question about a single chemical and you were a designer at Nike, you would get a 50-page report that cost you $10,000, and that was just for the key ingredient in that material. If you wanted to do that for all 10 or 15 ingredients in that material, times it by 10 or 15 to get the price to do that. And you can imagine, even at a company the size of Nike, if that was if those were the resources required to understand a single formulation coming at you for a new blue pigment in a running shoe rubber, you quickly sort of ran out of gas on doing that deeper dive. So what we did was we built that information and started to distribute it with our toxicologists at Scivera. We started to distribute it on a services model where people could access that information instead of for $10,000 a chemical, for in some cases $10 a chemical. And so we're delivering that information out in the world to decision makers at a fraction of the cost of traditional toxicology work, because in so many cases, and this is what was a really cool moment in the work we were doing, it's the same stuff that's used pretty much everywhere. The same industrial chemicals are used in aerospace as they are in running shoes, as they are in office furniture, as they are in wallboard, as they are in automotive interior components. It's all the same stuff, simply because all that stuff's made at volume. It's all tried and true in performance, and it makes it cost effective if you're manufacturing it at scale. So the world goes to source those materials. Now, if we just understood those materials better and we could improve them over time, that's the mission of Scivera and our software platform, Scivera Lens. So we built the platform based on services for about 8 years, from 2008 till 2016. And it was essentially a services based business supported by the underlying technology platform, Scivera Lens. Then we made the decision, and this was just 3 of us at the time, we made the decision to go out and raise a round of financing, build a team, build a product that was a pure SaaS offering, and grow that product more purely as a B2B, as Matt said, light touch software platform for businesses to use at scale. And the Scivera Lens product that you see today is a much more streamlined version of that original platform and is offered to hundreds of businesses around the world to help them make better decisions about chemicals and materials in their supply chain and for their product. And it embeds that deeper knowledge of human and environmental health impact potential of a material or a chemical, so that they're constantly improving that over time, beyond just not breaking the law, beyond just complying with regulations. Of course, they still do that too, but they're now making more informed decisions. So that's a general overview of the business. And as Hope said, in October of last year, Scivera was acquired by a business based in Belgium called Enhisa. And Enhisa is traditionally a 30-year-old compliance-based business, compliance intelligence business. So they provide content and software worldwide to the global 1,000 companies, mainly to help those companies navigate the regulations that exist in the various markets that they're interested in either operating or selling into. So Enhisa has always been a compliance-based business. In November of 2020, Enhisa acquired a news and community business based in the UK called Chemical Watch. And Chemical Watch for the last 15 years or so has been a central resource in the world of helping decision makers in mainly consumer products companies better understand the landscape of chemical regulation and chemical trends, green chemistry, sustainable chemistry included, as a news service, as a gathering place, events on a regular basis around the world, and as a training community. So Chemical Watch in the UK and HISA EHS in Brussels and worldwide. And now what was of interest to HISA and Chemical Watch for that matter was this third leg of the stool. That is, how do you get your arms around sustainable chemistry and build that in as a business process in addition to the critical things of training and chemicals compliance in the consumer product space. And that's where Scivera was a nice addition to the work that they've been doing in the business that they're growing. And so here we are joining this company, going through an intense integration process right now. Super exciting. My colleagues, around 20 of us, are going through this process, and I, not without bumps in the road. And I have a feeling some of you have been through on this meeting have been through this process before, but it's an exciting new challenge for me. There's a new role for me on the horizon, which is pretty cool also. And maybe I'll stop there, Hope, and see if that's the right amount of time, or I can, obviously, there's plenty of stories to tell about the business over the last 12 years or so, but hopefully that was a good thumbnail sketch of the work we've done and the mission that we've been on and continue to be on going forward.
Yeah, you have a couple more minutes if you have a great story to share, but otherwise we can also open up for Q&A, and that could guide the direction of the stories that you share. So I guess.
Well, maybe connect, I'd like to connect a little bit to some of the things Matt said and some of the feedback Matt got, because one of the pieces of information or advice I got very early back when Scivera was still a services business, technology enabled services business, was you have to focus. You absolutely have to pick a lane and really intensely get into it. And I struggled with that. I really was challenged with it because coming from a consulting background, it's in the work that I did for the first 10 years of my career, it was very opportunistic. We would have calls from Dell Computer, or we'd have calls from Herman Miller, a big office furniture company, or we'd get inquiries from various categories in the world of consumer products, and you kind of take them all on. You kind of say, yeah, sure, we can do that. And that was the curse of Scivera for the first 5 years or so, is that we were very scattered. We were still in that mode of services and taking on all comers. And I got some advice around that time to really pick a category and focus on it. And ultimately, we ended up really focusing on apparel and footwear. And the momentum we got there over the last 5 years especially was really key to our growth. We doubled 3 years in a row in subscribers and annual recurring revenue. So it really helped us see that hockey stick happen. And having that focus and really, politely engaging with other categories as they came in or expressed interest, but really focusing most of the effort and the engagement on a particular category really helped us see that growth that we needed, and really helped us fuel the engine of continuing product development and growing the team. So that was a key lesson for me. Probably not soon enough, but early enough to be helpful for our history.
Awesome. Can you think of any other pretty significant lessons learned on your journey, even from the biofuels company into that? I don't know what the success of that company was, but anything about that transition or anything?
Well, I think a couple of things. The biofuels business was super interesting. It ended up being a real challenge, largely because of the inconsistency of federal policy on renewable energy and biofuels specifically. That's a whole separate conversation and chapter, but it created a lot of risk for the startups that were in that category and trying to grow and build biofuels capacity in the US and worldwide. So that was a lesson learned there, is to, if you're wholly dependent on government policy for the success of your business, it really can create some serious risk and whipsaw reaction. The other thing I would say back on the Scivera topic is, and this might relate, Matt, to the work you're doing as well. What we were asking companies to do was change their business process, because traditionally, the folks that do this work in this space of chemicals and sustainable chemistry and materials, it was partly the teams in compliance in these big brands, or in their suppliers upstream, or in the retailers that sold their products. The compliance teams have a pretty narrow scope, just don't break the law. And they typically don't like to think outside that sphere, right? So if you go to them and say, I've got this great thing for you, can help you go beyond compliance, they'll say, that's not my job. My job is to comply with regulations. So we had a lot of sort of false start discussions with some of these major global brands. Then moving into an increasing category in large companies, and small ones even for that matter, is product stewardship and of course quality and sustainability, and getting in front of those folks and saying, here's how you can do this in an efficient way, still required them to change the way they did things. They were still doing things with lists of chemicals that they would communicate to their suppliers and say, hey, these things aren't regulated yet, but we're not going to use them, and we need you to not use them either in our products. It was still sort of a compliance approach. And what that didn't do was it implied, it didn't get at the underlying human and environmental health of the chemicals and materials, because if you make a list of chemicals that are known to be bad, even if they're not regulated, and you send them to your supplier, that implies that's the complete list of bad chemicals, right? And they can still use anything other than what's on this list and what's regulated. And what these brands were finding, that these companies would comply with these lists of restricted chemicals, but they'd still have things that were killing fish downstream from the manufacturing facility, or they were still having problems with their customers, complaining about reactions to substances and materials. And so these companies were trying to figure out, how do we get at this underlying characteristic of a chemical or a material and understand that, as opposed to just trying to make lists of chemicals that our suppliers should avoid, because that's not solving the problem. And so gathering information about the actual ingredients in a material, evaluating that from a toxicology point of view, that heavy lift, expensive lift I was talking about, but doing it efficiently, and then providing that feedback to decision makers, either upstream or in the business, about what materials can and can't be used. That's the way to move toward more sustainable materials and sustainable chemistry in the supply chain. And that was a huge lesson for us to figure out how to tell that story about how a company should or can or might change their business process about materials decision making. But in the big companies, they're all different dynamics depending on where you are and who you talk to, as far as where those decisions are made. And just navigating that landscape was a challenge that some smart people that I work with helped us to figure that out.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. Let's open it up for Q&A. What questions do you guys have for Joe? Usually takes them a minute. One time. And then it starts rolling. Matt's got one first.
I mean, you touched on something that is actually very specific problem to what we're dealing with, because of processes that already exist and like causing change, because there is some organizational change that typically has to happen with what we're doing. So, I mean, if you can expand a little bit on how to get through some of that even more, like I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, Matt, it's I'm not sure I have the answer to it. It in some ways it's just persistence and determination to help someone see that there's a different and potentially better way of doing something. It often takes a dedicated, committed, risk taker in an organization to be your champion and see something through to drive change. I'm the worst offender. When someone brings a new tool to me and wants me to try it, it's really hard for me to make that shift, even though it's better. Maybe that's an age thing, maybe that's a wiring thing, or both. But finding those people in those organizations that are that'll be your champion, it's really critical to business process change, I think. And I guess one more story on that thread, and tying it back to the different ways you get the word out and engage with people. I had sort of the quintessential LinkedIn home run experience back in, I would say, I think it was 2010, early days of that network and social media in general, I guess. I was just searching around on LinkedIn one day and came across a person at the toy company Mattel who looked like a fit for what we were trying to do. And I sent him a note, direct messaged him, I guess. And he wrote me back and said, "Oh, I just left Mattel, but here's the person you need to talk to." And that person immediately responded to me when I sent her a note and said, "I'm not the right person to talk to, but this is the person you need to talk to at Mattel." And about 2 months later, they were one of our first biggest subscribers. And it was just one of those things where, just following those threads and pulling on those leads, that was one of probably 200 messages I sent out that week on LinkedIn, but it happened to be the right one. And it turned out the woman who connected me to the person who was the subscriber at Mattel back in 2010, she's now a senior executive at Apple, and they became a subscriber of ours about 4 years ago. Through that sort of ongoing connection. So just, it sounds cliche, but just always getting out there and always throwing those lines in the water and always, having that kernel of a statement to say, like some of the folks described here earlier. What is that intro line to pique someone's interest? And you got to find that champion. You got to find that person who's got that open mind, who really wants to see something improve in their organization, and also, wants to see you be successful. Those are just really key human characteristics that I think are what, to me, excites me so much about the work that I do, getting to meet folks like you and engage with people out in the world, because I have a story to tell. Might not resonate with everyone, maybe even might not resonate with most people. All it needs to do is resonate with enough people to help you get to the next level of achievement. And finding those folks is the sometimes super hard work and a big challenge. But yeah, so that's that part of the story, I guess.
Awesome. Great story. Great feedback too. Very applicable to anybody on here, I know. Any other questions for Joe?
I have a question.
Yeah,
Sort of relate. I'm Trisha, by the way. Related to this idea of keeping plugging along. I have a software business that is changing the way consumers behave, not the way businesses behave, but the way consumers behave. And I have found that very challenging, because when I explain it to people, they're like, "Oh, that's amazing. I'm just going to do what I already know how to do because change is hard." But I think for me, sometimes I struggle to know, like, when do I keep plugging and when do I pivot? Like, when is the market telling me not yet versus when do I just need to keep going down more avenues? And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experience with that discernment, or when you didn't have that discernment, that kind of thing?
Well, Trisha, I think in some ways it's potentially a common character flaw across entrepreneurs that you just never give up, and you're just sitting there like almost to the point of lunacy. You're like, I know this is going to hit at some point, and I know it's going to happen. I think back to the focus and concentrating in a particular category and trying to connect as well as possible and not being spread too thin helps. But you meet people socially, or you encounter them professionally, and you hear that they have built a business or an organization. It doesn't have to be a business. They built an organization or an idea to some level of maturity. You can look them in the eye and they've been through that just ridiculous perseverance of getting something off the ground. And it's a good connection. It's a pretty amazing thing to encounter someone in any sphere who's been through that, and what they've been through. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but knowing when to pivot, I have to say, I don't really have a lot of experience with that. Other than the biofuels example, where my three partners and I kind of looked at each other and said, this ain't going to happen. We need to pivot. But Scivera was, 2008 through today, major lows, some amazing victories and achievements culminating in October. But yeah, just hanging in there and seeing it through, and using a lot of the information that you get from the market and adapting, but still hanging in there. And I'm sure other folks on this call have much more experience than I do on it and can weigh in too. I'd be grateful to hear some more.
Was there a time at Scivera since the beginning where you did question it, or you wondered if you guys were going to make it? You said you had some pretty low lows.
Yeah, probably every month. Where you're looking over your shoulder to make payroll. You are trying to pitch that next round of funding. You're in the middle of a negotiation with 4 interested companies who are interested in some form of acquisition. All of those chapters in Scivera and 1,000 others, you're kind of like, what the heck am I doing? And I have this conversation with my kids a lot. It's not that you know everything, because no one does. It's not that you're 100% confident that you're going to pull off what you're doing. It's being able to get past that and tell your story and be engaged with people in a positive way and not giving up, and you get there. It doesn't always happen, but that's, my story. But it was fear factor 11 on a lot of cases.
Well, definitely you're right, a great story at the culmination last year. What's next for you personally as an entrepreneur? To see yourself, what's next for you?
Yeah, well, I have a new job that's going to be announced in a couple weeks, where I'm moving to the group level at Anhisa, staying in Charlottesville, but going to be part of the larger group and basically being a stakeholder engagement activist across the group, across all the product lines, helping to listen to industry groups and large brands and large supply chains and bring that information back to the 3 main products that Anhisa has under its umbrella, and help that story be richer going back out into the world. It's a really exciting transition for me. I'm really not too sure about where it's going to lead, but at the same time, it's I think really fits with what I'm interested in doing going forward, and I've always loved to do it. That listening and hearing what needs are out in the market and within various stakeholders, NGOs and governments as well, is going to be in my sphere of engagement. So super excited about that. Not sure what else. Starting guitar lessons tonight. Doing that on Zoom. I've played guitar for 20 years, but I've never really taken lessons. So I'm excited to start that chapter as well. So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, congrats on that promotion, if you will. So
Thank you.
any other questions for Joe?
What kind
All
of guitar do you play?
What's that, Max?
What kind of guitar do you play?
I have a 1992 era Gibson J30, that acoustic guitar that I've beaten up pretty heavily since grad school, but I finally got it repaired and it's in pretty good shape. So I'm gonna keep using that.
That's awesome.
Oh, very nice.
Cool. Well, Joe will be in a breakout room as well, so we can chat with him a little bit more, but let's go ahead and move on to announcements.